Is there such a thing as too much luck? Is there such a thing as too much fun? Messing around, wondering how it's taken so long. I'm really so strong. It's not too much at all.
Welcome to Too Much. I'm very excited because this week we're talking about the core of why I started this podcast. I was looking at the world and wanting to explore different frameworks for a more sustainable future to give people better tools to live a more fulfilled life. And it really stemmed around my curiosity that we might have everything we need, but we just don't know how to organize it and bring it together or to get the information out in a more distilled, clarified way. And so, what better to do than bring on an expert on curiosity? So today, I have the ultimate pleasure of sharing an hour with Scott Shigeoka, who I met on the street in downtown LA. Welcome, Scott.
Welcome. And we met through our curiosity for one another. We're like, ooh, special human. Who is that? I want to know more. So,
No, it was honestly the best meet cute of
oh
my
my
entire
God.
life. And I'm going to read you his bio so you can learn a little bit before we dive in. So, Scott Shigeoka is an internationally recognized curiosity expert, TED speaker, and the award winning author of Seek: How Curiosity Can Transform Your Life and Change the World. Oh my God. Also, my makeup is like making me cry. I'm sorry, everyone. If you see me tearing, it's not because I'm sad
Oh
or
my God.
happy.
No,
I'm
the
just
bio,
having like
just you were
makeup in
so
my
touched
eye.
by the bio, like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're not done with the bio. I might continue to cry. Here we go. His work focuses on how we can strengthen our well-being and relationships, including at UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center. He is also a playwright and artist and was born and raised in Hawaii, but now lives in California.
Yes. Oh my God, that's
Welcome.
me.
That is you. So I'm so fascinated by the work that you do, but also this idea that you could have chosen anything in the entire world to become an expert in and focus in on. So why did you choose curiosity?
I think that curiosity is like the drumbeat of my life. Curiosity, the desire to understand. And it's not just about wanting to understand things or the world around us, it's also people. I talk about how curiosity is not just an intellectual pursuit, it's a heart-centered one as well. And I think that's really what caught my interest. Like, I've always been so curious about people. I've always wanted to know their stories and what makes them tick and what gets them super excited, what makes them feel alive, and who are the relationships that matter to them, and what does a meaningful life look like for them. And I'm that person that goes to the bar, goes to on the street in LA, and I'm like wanting to know the deepest things about someone. That's always just been the way in which I move through the world. And I think that's from my family. I've remember as a kid growing up and just going to the grocery store, and like my mom or my dad would just ask everyone that we meet, like in the grocery aisle, the cashier, the person begging, like everyone has a story. And I was always instilled with that pursuit, in my life. And so I've carried that throughout my life. It's, built so many amazing connections. It's helped me to heal personally in my own life through some really difficult and challenging moments. And, I think that's like the initial impetus. But I think it really solidified as like a professional aspiration when I was in Joshua Tree in a few years ago, or many years ago at this point, and I started to hear voices. Actually, I was celebrating a friend's birthday party, and I had gone on a psychedelic experience, and I started to hear voices during that trip. And I thought it was just maybe like a bad trip because the voices were saying really like scary things, harsh things, or saying, you don't belong here, and no one likes you, you have no worth, like all of these sort of really nasty things. And I was like, okay, I just need to get through the day, and when I wake up tomorrow after sleeping well, like they're going to be gone. But essentially those voices were playing in my head for the next few days, for the next few weeks. I had auditory hallucinations for over 6 months. And when I was working with a
Wow.
therapist at UCSF, he basically told me, have you ever tried getting curious about the voices? Like really asking
Mm.
yourself, Where did they
Mm.
come from? Have you heard these things before? What would you say back to them if you were in conversation with them? And I was like, what? You want me to do what to my, but actually taking his advice and getting curious about the voices led to this incredible journey of healing and deepening my understanding of myself. And I was just like, oh my God, this is something everyone can tap into. They might not be hearing voices, but there might be something in their life that's giving them immense fear, or something that's holding them back, or
Mhm.
something that's challenging them. And curiosity becomes this huge tool for them to move through it.
It becomes such an opportunity. And when you look at it that way, it's easier to stay resilient in those hard moments. Like I had a really hard year a couple years ago, and I had all these ugly feelings come up. And I was just like, you know what? My only job right now is to investigate those feelings. To say, like, why am I experiencing jealousy? Why am I experiencing resentment? Why do I have this lack? And the ability to look at it with curiosity was such an invitation for me to work through it versus ignoring it. And then it would stay with me and I wouldn't have been able to release those really hard feelings. And I think it's the biggest
Yeah.
opportunity if we let it be.
Anytime you're feeling a sense of fear, I was just talking to a friend who was saying, I'm sending off my kid to college and I'm going to be an empty nest. And, it's bringing up all these fears and anxieties. But, you reminded me, to just be curious and to think about, like, what is this experience going to be like for them? And what is this new beginning going to look like for me? And as they as she turned from fear towards curiosity, instead she felt like her anxiety was dissipating, and she felt that she was more open, to the experience that her child was going to
Mm.
have, but also that she was going to have herself. And that's actually backed by the research. The research does show that, by taking on a mindset and a practice of curiosity, that is associated with lower levels of anxiety. And, we live in a very anxious world today. We are bombarded on social media and with the news and in our own daily lives, just trying to survive, with feelings of anxiety. And so this is such a tool and a practice and a resource for us that we are all born with to use when we are feeling
Yeah.
those emotions.
And so you wrote a book on this, you've done a TED Talk, you've spoken hundreds of places across the globe, and you created a model around curiosity that I'd love you to just give us the Cliff Notes version of your dive
Yeah.
model.
So the dive model is all about how do you access deep curiosity. So first, what is deep curiosity? So curiosity lives on a spectrum between shallow and deep. When we're getting to know someone and trying to understand them and wanting to be curious towards them, we can ask, for instance, questions like, what's your name? Or what do you do for work? Or where do you live? Or what part of LA are you from? Oh my God, so cool. That helps us get data points about who this person is, but it doesn't reveal the full picture. And that's why that's called shallow curiosity. But as you move down the spectrum towards the deep end, the quality of your questions and your exploration begin to change. They begin to deepen. So instead of asking a question like, what's your name? You might ask, what's the story of your name? Or instead of asking, what do you do for work? You might ask, what makes you come alive in life, or what brings you meaning in life? Because in those kinds of questions, you now start to hear, maybe the relationship that they have to their name, or the cultural components of their name, or who they were named after, or who named them, or what brings them meaning in life. And so I think those types of explorations, that deep curiosity, we know strengthens relationships, not just in the moment, but increases their longevity. So when we have this deep curiosity towards
Mm.
others, we're more likely to have stronger relationships and more long-lasting relationships. And that's not just, with people we don't yet know, like strangers. It also includes the people we do know, those that we are in romantic relationships with, our family, our friends, our colleagues, our neighbors.
Hmm.
So we want to try to get to deep curiosity with as many people around us so that we can deepen our connections towards them. So the dive model is just the gateway to getting there. And D stands for detach, which is letting go of our assumptions, letting go of the sense of certainty. Anytime we are certain about something, we cannot access deep curiosity. The I is intend, which is how do we be really intentional about the mindset we're going into, let's say a conversation or a family reunion or, a really challenging conversation with our teenager at home. And what's the setting? for us to be our most curious selves, right? Is it when we're driving in LA traffic where there's a lot of stress and hecticness? Or is it at a dinner with phones down and we're able to feel psychologically safe with one another? V is value. And that is the really simple but sometimes hard to practice idea that everybody, every single person requires it is required of us to see the dignity and the humanity of every single person. And I'll say that again because that's so important. It requires us to see the humanity and the dignity of every single person. Does not matter if they have beliefs that we feel are so counter to what we believe in, or they come from a place we don't really understand geographically, or they come from a different faith practice than we do. We see everyone's humanity and dignity, point blank, full stop. And then the E is embrace. And that's how do we really remind ourselves to embrace deep curiosity, especially in the moments that are hard. And that includes, the
Yeah.
personally challenging moments when we're trying to reckon, for instance, with what the F are these voices that I'm hearing in my head? Like what is this experience that I'm
Yeah.
having? To, you know, the societal challenges that we're facing in our culture and our society today, which so many of the folks listening to
Mhm.
your podcast, feel in an embodied way day to day.
I think there's never been a more important time to embrace this model. We're in this place where we have to figure out how to have productive discourse, and being online, it's just impossible because people aren't looking to create connection online. And I recently had posted something about, we did an episode on the single tax. So I was talking about how disproportionately expensive it is to be single in America. You end up paying more. And of course, break that down by inequity structure. Women and women of color are the least set up for success in that dynamic. And so I posted something on TikTok about this. And I ended up getting this really interesting conversation with this guy. I assume he lives in like the Midwest based on just some of the cultural references and the conversation. And someone that like, I probably never would come into contact with. And I was really, really trying to get to a place of understanding. And so was he. And it was actually really helpful for me because I'm always willing to engage with another viewpoint because I believe at the core we all pretty much want the same things. We all want to feel
Yeah.
connected. We all want to have happy lives. We want to feel stable. We want to feel like we can achieve the things we want in life. And we have different ways of expressing that or different viewpoints. But I was like, oh, here's this person that's actually willing to do the hard thing online. And what was actually the coolest for me was I asked a lot of people, I'm like, they were quoting things. I'm like, well, what's your sources? And I found so many people were actually really doing diligence before they were posting their opinions or these articles. I was finding that I was actually having the opposite of what I expected, which it was not a lack of misinformation. It was actually people that were really coming to the table with credible sources. And that was illuminating for me because that's a I guess my limiting belief about the internet is that's not exactly what everyone's doing. And what you're telling us here, giving us a framework to really figure out how to weather this current societal disconnect. And so you have a lot of personal experience. You've been cross country multiple times, going into politically opposing spaces to your beliefs. Can you talk us through your different feelings in those environments and what you learned?
Yeah, I'll just start by saying, like, we know that from the research, when you are curious towards others, you feel less threatened by them. And by, actually building a relationship to someone who you feel like you do not know or feel dissimilar to can actually be the best way to reduce your fear about them and to better understand them and where they're coming from. And I think that's the promise of curiosity. And that's why I went on the road, because I had realized, wow, I've spent so much of my time in these cities, that are primarily liberal. And, I spent most of my adult life, for
Mhm.
instance, in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I was like, I am so curious and want to better understand for myself, like what is going through the hearts and minds of people all across this country, because I'm seeing things on social media and I'm seeing things on the media, especially mainstream media. And I'm like, what else is there to know about people? Because there has to be more complexity, there has to be more dimensionality. And so in 2019, I packed everything I owned basically into this tiny ass Toyota Prius, and I took out the back seats and I went to Home Depot with a friend and put in a little bed, got a Planet Fitness membership, and I traveled all across the country. And I was like, I'm gonna go to the South, I'm gonna go to rural Appalachia, I'm gonna go to the Midwest, I'm gonna talk to people on the street, go to events, go to rallies, and try to understand, where can my curiosity take me, and what can this reveal about people who are very different from me. I think like the first thing I learned is that even if we disagree, for instance, on who we're going to be voting for in the next presidential election, there's probably a lot of things that we actually do agree on. So, for instance, when I was at a Trump rally in Minnesota, many people, just like I am, are really frustrated at the two-party system. Like, we want more options, to be able to
Yeah.
vote for them. You know, Many of the people that I talk to
Right.
actually care about the environment and consider themselves conservationists, and that's something that I am also aligned to. I might use different language, I might describe the work in different ways, or think the approach to getting there is different, but we have this common goal around wanting to protect the environment, wildlife, and our relationship to nature. And so I think that was like a big first aha, was actually we're so focused sometimes on what makes us different. It's almost like a cognitive distortion. We're focused so much on what makes us different when there's actually so much that actually we share. We should remember, like, what are the values, for instance, that we share that are underneath our beliefs and our experiences and our viewpoints? Or what are the experiences that we might have both had growing up that we can connect on? Or even in this wide array of different issue areas that we could focus in on in our country, what's one that we agree on and that we can, you know, together work together on trying to solve, even though we come from different political ideologies or views? And then I think the big second thing is that, you know, I realize that personal stories matter so much. And I think that's the power of curiosity, is that when you're actually able to not just talk about the abstract and not just talk about the policies, but you actually get down into people sharing their own personal views, how they're impacted, by the policies, learning about people's stories and their upbringings, why their faith is important to them, why my queer identity is
Yeah.
important to me. When we have those kinds of exchanges, which we did because we're waiting for hours in line to get into the arena to, watch Trump and other folks speak, for their rally, it becomes this really beautiful moment of cross understanding where they maybe haven't gotten as deep with someone who's like me, who represents, or who not represents, but who has had the experiences that I've had. And similarly, like, I've never, especially in the beginning of my journey, had gotten so deep with people, especially strangers who had very different views than me. So just the power of curiosity to connect us across these differences is so key. I mean, I will say caveat that it's not like kumbaya. Like, it's not about neutrality. It's not about, not having our convictions and not saying what we believe in. That curiosity isn't about dumbing down or demeaning or diminishing what we're so passionate and convicted about. Instead, it's about saying, let's not have that override everything. Let's not say our viewpoint is the paramount, is the best, is the only. And instead, use
Right.
our curiosity to understand different viewpoints and to have conversations about it and to learn from the perspectives and the experiences of others. Like, that is what I'm saying when I talk about curiosity.
Yeah, I don't think it's about necessarily getting to consensus either. I think for me, when I've traveled to sort of more red areas, which is not, really my ideology, I've had a lot of conversations around like gun control, for example. Like, I believe in gun
Hmm.
control. These people believe in the right to bear
Hmm.
arms. And having some of those conversations, it wasn't about us finding this thing to agree. Or I'm trying to convince you. It was really for me to understand someone's methodology about why they believe that. And in those conversations, I learn a lot. I learn
Hmm.
about their fears, their motivations. That's, I think, the point is like really it's more about learning than about reaching the same viewpoint. Like, we're all very different with very different life experiences, and we're cultured by our life journeys. And
Exactly.
so I don't need to agree with everybody. I just want to have a place where we don't have to be so hateful. Curiosity is really that key to getting to a place of I see you, and it doesn't mean that we have to align on everything, but you are seen and you are heard, and thank you for sharing.
Exactly. And curiosity is going to be the only way that we are ever going to be transformed and to grow as people, right? I think about how my curiosity towards people of faith, for instance, transformed my initial discriminatory views towards them because I was so hurt and harmed when I was younger because of my queer
Right.
sexuality, and was told and was messaged that that was not okay, and that that I'm gonna, that I'm a sinner and I'm gonna go to hell because of that. But I felt like that doesn't make sense to me because this is who I am, and like this is like, this is who I love. And so that generated this opposition, that generated this feeling of prejudice towards all people of faith. And I had to use my own curiosity
Yeah.
to actually get in front of more people of faith and realize, wow, like, first of all, not everyone believes that. The congregation that I grew up in might have believed that, but there are so many other congregations that are led by queer clergy that are very accepting of the LGBTQ community, that are even led by them. I also had to learn that, no two Christians are the same, in the same way that no two queer people are the same. And that curiosity is such a pursuit of
Right.
finding out about a person's individuality, right? Because we're in this culture that is so obsessed with labels and is so obsessed with the group identity. And we say, okay, you're a part of this group or this camp, so I know everything I need to know about you. But that is just not true. That we have, every person in a group is different. They're not a monolith. So we have to use our curiosity to better understand who they are as individuals.
No, that story in the book about you going back to church inspired me because I'm very spiritual, but I'm not really into organized religion. And I realized like maybe I've been resistant to that space and maybe that's something I need to
Mhm.
explore. So you definitely motivated me to take a deeper look. I was like, I think there's something underneath my resistance and maybe it's time to figure out what's
It's
going
amazing
on.
that you're open-hearted and open-minded enough, while you were reading the book to, to reflect on that and take that in.
We're living in this like the golden age of division and hatred and lack of curiosity, and which I don't think is actually true. I always feel like there's a small number of very loud voices on the internet, and that we have to remember it's not the sort of silent majority. But for the times that we live in, what is one thing that you would suggest that each of us could do today to move towards a more harmonious
Yeah, I think
place?
one thing is, like, going back to the dive model and detaching, is anytime you hear something in a conversation that maybe is bringing up some emotions and is activating for you because you disagree with it. Sometimes our impulse is to say, no, 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 and then to say our own opinion and our own perspective on it. And I would just say, like, this is a moment for us to transform that conflict into something that's really healthy, is to pause and slow down a bit and to tap into your curiosity instead. And you don't have to do this indefinitely. I'm just saying, to do this, as a first moment of intervention, and to say, okay, I disagree with that, but tell me more. Tell me more about why you feel that way. Is
Yeah.
there maybe a personal story, or experience you had that, made you feel that way, or, believe in that? And just see where that conversation takes you and see how that changes the way you can understand this person that's in front of you. And what you'll often find, and the research is, the emerging research is starting to support, is that when you are getting curious about them and their viewpoints and their experiences, curiosity is contagious often, and they will return the favor. And they might say, well, okay, you're asking me all these questions about myself. Like, tell me more about your viewpoint. And like, why do you feel the way you do? And that just becomes a much more constructive dialogue, a place where both people can learn and possibly be more open to transforming their own views and their own beliefs towards something that's more harmonious and just, and ones that a world that I think everyone wants to belong in, to your earlier point, right? We all want many of the same things. I think the second thing we can do is, we often, again, think about curiosity as this mind exercise, but it's also something that we can do in our
Mm.
bodies. And so I always say, like, take a 5 to 10 minute curiosity walk. If you're feeling stuck, and if you can get outside and, go around the block, go to the nearest park, whatever it is, and just be curious about what's around you, your neighbors, any wildlife you see, the things that are happening around you. And what you'll find is that curiosity practice is almost like exercising this muscle of
Mm.
curiosity that you can then take into conversations, that you can then take into, a really hard moment that you're going to have with a colleague or with your supervisor. So, what are the ways that we can think about curiosity as a muscle that we constantly can practice? And I think the third piece that I would say, I know you asked me for one, but I'm going to give three. I'm going to give people options here. Yeah,
Give us
yeah.
three. Give us
The
three.
third thing I would say is there's this practice of what's called mental rehearsal. So this really comes from sports psychology. A lot of times elite athletes, for instance, a gymnast, they won't just like hop on the floor and then do their routine. They'll close their eyes and imagine themselves doing their floor routine over and over. And what the research has found is that when you do that mental practice in your mind, you perform better. And that's been proven not just in gymnastics, but also in baseball and basketball and a number of different sports. And the same is true for our own behaviors and performance as humans in the world that we're living in. So you can do this mental rehearsal or mental practice before you have a really intense conversation, with a family member, or go back to that family reunion, or walk into a really high conflict moment with your colleagues, and think about, what are the questions I'm actually going to ask? Where is this conversation going to take place? How am I going to take care of myself before I have that conversation so I can show up as my full best self, whether that's, getting a good night's sleep, eating, before that conversation, or whatever it is that helps you to show up as your
Yeah.
best self. So I would say those three things are so helpful, like remembering to pause and slow down during conflict and tap into curiosity, remembering that this is something that you can do in your body. So getting curious about the world around you as a way of repping those exercises to grow your muscles. And then this third idea, which is really about mental rehearsal and practice.
I love this. So I love that you gave us mental and then body. I think the body, those are two
Yeah,
intelligence systems that we need to support. So I love that you gave us both of those. And the amount that walking comes up on this podcast is insane. I'm like, walking is really the antidote to everything. And no one is really understanding how important and essential that is. And I love this idea of a curiosity walk. And it doesn't take long, 5 minutes, or even step in your backyard. Like, and just look around. Like, I think that's such a powerful way to keep developing that muscle. And then number three really strikes me because I've made more of a practice probably in the past, probably post therapy, like past 8 years or so, to have more difficult conversations. And so in that process of having some really challenging conversations with family members or, people I dated that sort of betrayed me, I have often written a version of a script or ideas or bullet points or thoughts and like rehearsed how I'm going to say things, because my aim is really to be the most loving person I can be in these really more inflammatory dynamics. And I find that preparing for that really allows me to relax into that more loving state than showing up and feeling like nervous or
yeah,
high cortisol. And then I end up getting triggered and not showing up in the way that I
totally.
intended. And that's such a helpful
Totally.
tool.
Yeah. And I think it's just like, and it's just adding these like little nuances to, those practices. Like for walking, yes, we all should be walking. It's great for physiological and psychological health. And, take out the earbuds and just be in the world and attune your attention towards the world around you. Right. And that's what I mean when I talk about a curiosity walk. It's about really just refocusing outside of the digital world into the real world that we're living in and seeing what's around you. And also encouraging yourself to do things that are daring. Maybe you pass by, a neighbor and you typically don't say hi, or you maybe just give them a wave, see if you can, build on that and say like, oh my gosh, like, where are you heading off to? Or like, tell me more, how's your day going? Whatever feels comfortable for you. And then maybe from there, you level it up again the next time you see them. And it's like, oh my gosh, I noticed you had a skateboard. Like, are you a big skateboarder? What's your background with skateboarding? Which I actually just did with one of my neighbors, because I see him skateboarding everywhere, and I wanted to know his history behind that. And he actually had a career as a professional skateboarder. And I was like, oh my God. And that turned into such a beautiful conversation. So I
Amazing.
think that's what I mean by a curiosity walk. It's a walk that opens up the world to you rather than, what I often
Mhm.
see, even when I'm walking around Los Angeles doing my own little curiosity walk, is folks here, and they're just, they're not getting
Yep.
curious about the world that's immediately around them.
And it makes such a difference. One of the things I love about LA is actually the place I've lived the longest in my life. I moved a lot. It's crazy. I've been
Mhm.
here so long. And what I love the most is that I'm like, oh, I know the person
Mhm.
that owns that store. Oh, I know this person. And it becomes like I have such a robust community because I've taken the time to invest in all these interesting people over the years, that it makes my love to this city so much greater, because I'm like, oh, there's like a thread that keeps me
Totally.
here. It's bigger than
Totally.
me. I have this web of people who I love and
I will say
support.
that sometimes people are really great at exercising what I call their outward curiosity. They have that beautiful map of everyone in their neighborhood and they know all their stories.
Mm,
But when it comes to the inward curiosity, like what is that beautiful, vibrant map that's within themselves? Like what are the emotions that they're experiencing in any given moment?
mm.
What are the relationships that truly matter to them? What is challenging them? What is purposeful for them, there is less clarity there, right? And so I always say that in order to become a seeker, which is the title of my book, Seek, you need to not just direct your curiosity outward, but you also have to do it inward as well.
So, because you've been studying this for so long, I wonder because I've been a DJ now for 15
Yeah.
years and I'm in this place.
Yeah,
Yeah, you still got to come out. Come
let's
out to the
do
club.
it.
But what's been interesting is I have found that because I've never had something I've cultivated this long, I didn't realize that it could change over time. So I'm in this really exciting place. I'm in this new era of DJing where I feel a little bit more masterful than when I first started. I feel a little bit more free, like I have a little bit more knowledge, a flow state's more easily accessible. And I'm loving this idea that you can do something for a long time or study something for a long time and feel like you're just getting started. It's so fun. And so I wonder if in the process of studying curiosity, has your understanding of curiosity evolved and developed? What has transformed for you?
Oh my God, much. I mean, curiosity is one of those like really generative things where anytime you're talking about curiosity or you're getting curious, what we know is it releases dopamine and it makes us, that's the same, it's sometimes called the happy hormone. It's, what we release when we are having sex or eating a delicious meal or winning an award. These are things that, biologically we want to incentivize because they're helpful for our survivability, for us to thrive in the world. And so curiosity is no different because our ancestors used their curiosity to, find water and food sources, as a way to understand others, to build stronger kinship and stronger relationships so that they had a higher chance of survival because it's survival of the fittest, not in terms of like who is the fittest, but like, who fits, it's a survival of who fits and who belongs. And so,
Yeah.
I think that that's all really, really sort of like really helpful for us to like for me to take in and to remember. But as I went along the journey and I was like, oh my God, I'm having so much fun and this was really playful. I think the things that came up that I wasn't attuned to at first were some of the caveats and some of the potential consequences and some of the different ways curiosity shows up in a more
Mm.
nefarious way. And so an example of that is, for instance, what I call predatory curiosity, which only came, years into me exploring curiosity. And predatory curiosity is when someone is asking questions, but there is an agenda underneath it. There's an ulterior motive. They're asking you questions because maybe they're trying to get some information out of you, like a detective might, or maybe they're trying to walk you into a corner so they can prove you wrong, right? And it looks like an expression of curiosity because they're so open. The questions are open-ended and,
Mm.
their shoulders are really expanded out and they're leaning in. And it's all the things that we would look for behaviorally for curiosity, but because there is this agenda and ulterior motive, it is predatory. It is not true curiosity because true curiosity requires us to not know where we're going to arrive at. It requires us to be totally open-ended and totally delightfully surprised by what it is that we're encountering, right? Because we don't have an
Wow.
understanding of the destination we're going to. And so that was like a huge aha moment that came later on in the journey. Another example of that is curiosity. Our curiosity about others is earned, not deserved, right? My more naive understanding of curiosity was like, oh my God, we should all just be more curious and ask each other questions. And then I realized just because you're curious doesn't mean you deserve an answer. You could be curious about, someone's health diagnosis, about whether they're pregnant or not, about their hair, about, their marital status, like whatever it is, does not mean you are entitled to that information. You first must build the trust and the relationship, for you to be able to ask the kinds of questions that you're
Yeah.
going to get a response to, right? And so that's like a big aha moment that I also learned and read about in the book. You have to create a space of trust and build real relationships with people before you ask of them to, enter into the space of even deeper curiosity. So yeah, those are just, there's so much learning. There's probably things that I don't even know
I love
still to
that.
this day, that I'm going to encounter like in a year or two. So I love that it's like the gift that keeps on giving.
No, I'm having the aha around predatory curiosity. I was like, whoa, crazy. Because I do think of it as a positive thing. And you're like, oh, there's a light and shadow to
Yeah,
everything.
yeah,
But I wonder if this has a classification. Like, when you're like out and you're talking to someone you don't know that well and they
yeah,
sort of overshare.
yeah.
Is there a term for that or an idea within the curiosity realm for that?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a little bit of what I did, honestly. I realized like, wow, I'm such a deeply curious person. Like I'll ask people questions about like their heart and who they've loved and their families and growing up. And what I almost demonized shallow curiosity. I said, ugh, like I'm too good for shallow
Mm,
curiosity. It's always got to be about deep curiosity.
mm,
That's what transforms people. That's what connects us. But what I had to learn is just like the ocean, I'm from Hawaii, and just like the ocean, the shallow is no worse than the deep end. They all are the ocean and they both matter. And so I had to remember that people might not feel psychologically safe or feel comfortable to open up when I'm immediately coming up to them at a bar, at a conference, and asking them
yeah.
these really really deep questions. They're like, hey, yo, slow down, like we got to do some shallow curiosity work and build a relationship before you go and
Yeah.
do that. And so I think it's a reminder for me to be curious and to remember that every human is so different. Like I would happily talk about my deepest traumas, like even if I've never met you before, and I've done that like on the subway and like on
Yeah.
planes, but not everyone's going to do that. So how do you remember to be deeply curious and attuned to the person you're in conversation with and building a relationship with, so that you can both meet each other halfway?
Yeah, my therapist and I talked about that because I would start dating people and just blindly give my trust. And she was like, Denise, you can't do that. Like, trust is earned over
Yeah,
time. Like people have to show you that they're
yeah,
trustworthy. You can't assume that everyone's trustworthy just because you're
yeah,
trustworthy. And that was a big aha. But the other side of that was that when people were sharing too quickly or, creating sort of a false sense of intimacy, I guess, because it's one thing, like I believe you're someone who cares very deeply and are trying to build strong relationships. And
yeah,
so your sharing isn't coming from a place of trying to accelerate or trick or manipulate.
right.
But there are a lot of people who are using that idea, false premise of curiosity or sharing, as you said, the predatory version, to accelerate intimacy. And that was
Love
something that I had
bombing.
to learn to discern
Yeah,
because like you, I was like, yeah, I was like victim number one.
yeah, 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 yeah.
So
That's a real thing though.
yeah,
I mean,
but I learned. I believed that the way that I was honest and showing up honestly, so I always assumed the other person was, and I had to learn that that wasn't necessarily the case, and it was a hard learning curve. But that's what you ground us in the book with, was like understanding that you sort of build to this level of
yeah,
exchange.
but you were so curious in that moment with your therapist, because if you had a more certainty mindset rather than a curious mindset, you would have said, no, I love that about myself. I love that I go around the world and I can just like give my trust to people. That's what makes me beautiful. Like, screw what this therapist is saying. I know myself. I've only been working with this person for so long anyway. But you had this curiosity mindset instead, right? And you said, you know what? Like, there's probably like, one of my
Hmm.
mantras is everyone is a teacher. Like everyone has something to teach. It doesn't matter what your pedigree is, how old you are, what your life experiences are. Like every person I meet, every stranger is just a new teacher and can teach, me something and I can teach them something, right? And so, I think that you had that mindset and you're like, maybe there's something here. Like, let me investigate that. Let me get curious about that. Let me explore my own relationship around building trust and how I do that when I'm dating and what that means for me and my vulnerability and how to protect myself. And so I'd so just acknowledge and love that you
Oh,
are
thank
such
you.
an open-hearted and curious person yourself.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think that's really the therapy work. If we go in not being open or not being super honest, we're not going to get where we intend to be. And I was so desperate by the time I saw my therapist because I had such a bad dating pattern. I was like, I need help. And I was like, I obviously can't figure it out myself. I've read every book. And so I went in so just like someone give me the guidance and I was so willing. But I really think that's the trick to therapy because I know a lot of people have been in therapy for years and they don't see themselves shift, but it's because they're not as willing to try something
Yeah.
different or shift their behavior. And listen, it's hard. As someone who's had a bad dating pattern, I've had to make a lot of deliberate decisions to get better
Yeah.
relationships, which is
Yeah.
hard because it means like working against some of your natural
Totally.
inclinations. But guess what? The work
Yeah.
works. Being curious
Totally.
works.
Totally. Yeah, and it's like, we live in a culture that, again, going back to the antidote of fear is curiosity, right? I think we live in a culture where the last thing we want to do is fail, or the last thing we want to do is look cringe. But that is actually going against our growth, going against us having meaning in life, going against us being able to try new things that will expand our lives and our relationships and our meaning in so many beautiful ways. Like, I'm like, fuck, fail and be cringe. You know what I mean? Like, do it with curiosity, Ask yourself, like, what can I learn going into this date? What can I learn trying to go after my dreams? Like, what can I learn, meeting this person that's very different from me, and seeing these as experiences that where you're not focusing on the potential for failure or the potential to be cringe, but instead you're focusing on your curiosity and your potential to grow and live a more meaningful life.
If we are not willing to be cringe, then we are not really risking or saying or doing anything that
Exactly.
important. I saw this playwright, she wrote this thing I posted on my Instagram, and she was like, if your work does not sufficiently embarrass you, then you will never touch anybody. And I think about this all the time because I feel like everything I write or like any of my talks that I do, I'm always like, ooh, really embarrassing, really sharing a lot. But the work that I read that I'm most compelled by are people that are sharing really
Yeah,
scary
yeah,
things.
totally, totally. I love that. I think that's so true. It's like better. It's also like it's better to have like 100 super fans and like 10,000 like meh fans. You know what I mean? Like it's the same kind of concept that you're revealing more about yourself and you're being more authentic. Likely when you have those kind of polarizing views on how someone how others see you, and I talk a lot about polarization in the book. Like polarization across the board is not bad. You know what I mean? Like sometimes, we want to have polarizing views. That helps us to learn and grow and, see the full breadth of different perspectives. It's just affective polarization, the kind of polarization that is driving us apart, leading to hate, leading to contempt, leading to violence. Like that's the kind of polarization that we need to solve for. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So before I let you go here, can you just tell me what is pulling you next? Where is your curiosity
Oh
leading
my
you
gosh.
next?
Well, I just got a curiosity mobile. Like I'm like it has way more height clearance. It is no longer a Toyota Prius, and it's going to be outfitted this time with all of the storytelling tools that I need to go on a cross country road trip again next year. And one of the things I learned from my 2019 trip is that, yes, like this book came out of it and that was so wonderful, but we live in this social era, the social media era. And I was like, oh my gosh, I wish I had taken like more videos and like recorded some of the conversations I had and recorded the experiences and adventures I went on. And so I was like, if I ever do this trip again, like I'm going to do that. And so now I'm doing it. Yeah. So next year, I'm going to drive my little Curiosity Mobile across the country again. And I am going to do it this time with a social media crew. And I'm going to record videos and conversations of how people are fostering understanding and connection in this country, forging more belonging, using their curiosity to make this country just a little bit better, or big in a big way better. And that's going to be popping off on my Instagram and TikTok and LinkedIn and all that. So for anyone that's listening and you want to follow along, you can follow me at Scott Shigeoka. I'm sure we can like put the like, I don't know why I'm pointing down like that, but we can put the
It'll be in the show notes. We
show
will
notes.
certainly
Yeah,
be
for
linking
sure.
in the show notes. It's the 2026 version of like the Oscar Mayer Wiener Mobile. It's now the
Oh
Curiosity
my God.
Mobile.
Yes. 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 And I should sling hot dogs. Like you're so right. There's nothing more American than slinging hot dogs. You know?
Nothing brings us together like hot dogs.
Although that might be just actually like, what do you put on a hot dog, right? Like, so maybe we're gonna have to use our curiosity and the best of our bridging skills to understand whether mustard actually goes on hot dog or not. So,
You might need a condiment bar.
this was so lovely.
Thank you so much for taking the time. Such a gift.
Such a gift. Love you, friend. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. If you do like listening, it would mean the world to us if you could subscribe or review the podcast anywhere that you watch or listen to the podcast. It really helps with the algorithm to share this with the world. I want to give a special thank you to young Spielberg and Sarah Yarkin for their beautiful work on our opening jingle, Dana Boulos for her help with the beautiful art, and to all of you for tuning in and keeping this dream alive. If you want to hear certain topics or from certain guests, please feel free to email us. We really, really want to hear from you and see how we can best support you. See you next time.